Good evening. My name is Nina Beth Cardin. I am the director of the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights and a member of the Interfaith Communities Working Group that is organizing this environmental justice training. We thank you all for being here yet again and for your continued commitment to learning about the critical issue of environmental justice. I would like to acknowledge and thank the organizers of this training, the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights, Central Maryland Ecumenical Council, Green Grace, the environmental mission of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland, and the Delaware Maryland Lutheran Synod. Tonight is the fourth of 5 Thursday evenings, which are designed to prepare us to move from learning to action and from information to advocacy. So to help us set the stage and guide our spirits and intent and give us some sort of cleansing so we can move from the energy of this week to the energy of this moment, I'm delighted to introduce Ann Payne, who will help us open with prayer and contemplation.
Oh, thank you. I'm Ann Payne, and I thought when I was asked to do this was kind of funny because I'm a Quaker, and as you may know, Quakers don't pray. We sit in silence for an hour, but that seems like maybe that was the right call. I'll just say briefly, the reason we do that is that we Quakers, we don't have a whole lot of dogma, but we believe in something called ongoing revelation, which is that God is present at all the time, and that we need to be attending and listening to God's presence. And that's why we sit in silence. And so I thought tonight, so I can't ask you to sit for an hour, but I thought maybe what I'm going to do is read a short poem, and which is weirdly appropriate, I think, and not known what the news was going to be like this week exactly. So I'll read this brief poem, and after I'm finished, I will ask you to maybe close your eyes if you want to, and just rest in silence. It'll only be, Bernadette has promised me she will time it 60 seconds. A minute, if you don't sit in silence a lot, can seem terrifyingly long, but I promise you, don't be scared. Bernadette is on the ball. She will stop it and get the meeting back going. So the poem that I wanted to read is by the poet laureate of, where the heck did I put it? The poet laureate of Oregon, and his name is Kim Stafford. And he has been chronicling things that are going on from his home base in Oregon. He did beautiful poems about the wildfires. I can't even read out loud, they make me cry. But he has an ongoing series about the pandemic. So the poem that I'm going to read is, and what I'll ask you to do is at the end of this, just, if you want to run up and get a piece of cornbread, that's fine. But I suggest that you take the opportunity to just settle and quiet and sort of return your consciousness from the exterior to the interior, to the silent, peaceful garden of your own heart. Okay, so the poem by Kim Stafford is called, it's from the point of view of a keynote speaker. It's called Keynote by Zoom. Instead of a distant figure at the podium, I'll be a talking head on speaker view. Instead of listener rows in business casual, my people will be home, some in robe and slippers, petting the dog, holding a child. In our pandemic, if I'm tempted to get all high and mighty, they can mute me, which is good. And I can tap gallery view and we're all equal. Beautiful faces around the fire, looking down, looking away, looking within. Friends, help me. Though scattered and alone, we are here together. Our lives are knit in one convening, linked by all this mystic apparatus. So I can say to you, let's begin with silence. Sorry.
That was a minute. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Ann. That was refreshing. We needed that bridge, that distance from before to now. So thank you so much. Our speaker tonight, which is why we're gathered here, will focus on advocacy. As you listen to her, listen for those things she says that resonate with you. Those activities you think you can do. Those activities that fit with your passion and your skills. Those actions that would excite you and inspire you. As this week is showing us on both the national and local levels, political engagement and advocacy matters. And that is no doubt why all of you are here. So as you listen to our speaker tonight, imagine what of all that she says fits you best. I am delighted to introduce Brooke Harper, who is the regional campaign strategist for 350.org, where she is campaigning to keep fossil fuels in the ground and to help us justly transition to a 100% renewable energy economy. One of the most critical things that anyone can do today. Prior to joining 350, Brooke served as Chesapeake Climate Action Network's Maryland director, advocating for progressive climate policies in and around the state, including Maryland's successful fracking ban and passage of the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And I have to tell you, I have seen Brooke in action in both of those. That's how I met her, actually. I don't know if she remembers me as much as I remember her. And she was just stunningly inspiring and compelling. And Brooke, if I may say, sort of made me think, at least, that if I didn't get engaged, there was really something wrong with me, that I was just not holding up my part of the world. I just needed to get engaged. So you're just tremendously motivating. Brooke has spent over a decade organizing and coordinating electoral, label, and anti-globalization campaigns. And we are just thrilled and honored to have Brooke here with us. So Brooke, with that, I turn the evening over to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you all for having me, and also for giving me a break from refreshing the AP election results every 30 seconds. I really appreciate it. I just want to say I see a couple of familiar faces, and it's so good to see all of you, because throughout all of my activism in Maryland, the faith community has been fighting alongside us. So it has played a big part in shaping my activism, as well as all of the victories that we had. We could not have done it without the faith community. We would not have a fracking ban in Maryland if it wasn't for the faith community. We wouldn't have offshore wind in Maryland if it wasn't for the faith community. We wouldn't have had the Clean Energy Jobs Act if it wasn't for the faith community. And I think all of us know that we're in some turbulent times, and our climate and our earth is in a fragile period where it's time for us not to sit back. It's time for us to accelerate even more. And as people of faith, we know that it's the living out of our values, it's the living out of our faith, and that we must raise our voices. I'm going to share a little bit of a presentation for tonight. I just prepared and went through some different tactics and practices and tips that you can have, and also just wanted to preview some of the environmental legislation that you may see this year, and just offer us some time for discussion and deeper questions if you have any questions about the materials and the tactics presented here. So I'm going to share my screen, and barring any technological flops, this will go all right. So when we talk about like what's faith got to do with it, and like I've just said, people of faith have been central to like every movement in our country's history, and especially in Maryland and our fight to save our climate and our communities. So from the civil rights movement to the fight for LGBT rights in the climate movement, faith advocates have really been a central component of all of those movements. And when we think about how can we lift our collective voices, I've kind of broken it down into two different areas. So one is what can we do in our congregations? I'm sure, and I see Jonathan on this call, that there's a lot of things that you can do to make your churches more energy efficient. You can switch them to solar and be involved in green the congregation efforts. Another program that you can do with Interfaith Power and Light in groups like Chesapeake Climate Action Network is participation in a program called Climate in the Pulpits. And that's an initiative hosted every year by Interfaith Power and Light, where we ask for faith leaders to either dedicate their service to climate and one of the primary issues that we're lifting up in our state, or you can invite an activist speaker to come and talk to your congregation about why they're fighting for environmental issues. You can also offer space. That's a critical thing for activists. We always need space to view movies, to gather and to do teach-ins and talk to one another. And so that's another really critical thing that congregations can do, is just offer communal space for meetings and other things like that. Participate in your ecumenical advocacy days. There's several opportunities. I know the United Methodists have an advocacy day, as well as the Episcopals. So find out when your denomination's lobby day is, and also participate in ecumenical advocacy days held in Annapolis and federally. And also hold classes and teach-ins about environmental and climate issues. And then when we talk about how can we lift up our collective voices, I just wanted to go over some actions at the local and state level that you can participate in. So we have petitions, email advocacy, phone calls to legislators, meeting with your elected officials, and again, super important, participation in lobby days hosted by your denomination and partner organizations. So just to talk about petition drives, everybody I'm sure has signed a petition in their lifetime. And if you're an activist, at some point in time, you've ran a petition drive. And the main reasons that you should conduct the petition drive are, one, just to heighten community awareness of your issue, to bring visibility and recognition to your group, and to lead you to new members and future contacts for your group, and to demonstrate widespread community support for the changes you seek. And petition drives are a possibility to really sway the decision-making power. I do want to give one anecdote about how it helped in the fracking campaign. So in Frostburg, Maryland, one of our key tactics was actually a petition drive to support a measure to get the city to ban fracking. And we looked at the vote counts for that city for the local elected races, and found out that only about 300 people had participated in the last city council election. And so we knew that in order to elevate our issue and to show the strength of the community, that we needed to actually surpass that number of voters. And we did. We collected over 1,000 petitions from residents. If you're familiar with Frostburg, you'll know that it's a university town, but it was a really overwhelming tipping point for each of those city council members when they saw the number and the volume of people that have spoken up. Another way that you can really use your influence is through email advocacy. I'm sure you all have been getting a lot of emails, but during session and for important issues, one of the things that you might see is just a take action email. And legislators do track the number of people that are writing to them about an issue. One pro tip is a lot of organizations will send you a form email, but you'll often see that you have an option to personalize those emails. If you do have that option and an action alert, please take it. Legislators, it has more influence on legislators than just a form email, but form emails like petitions are a way to track how the issue is really swaying their constituents in their communities. So both are important, but if you do have that option, please do put in a personal message. Next is phone calls to legislator. I was really amazed when I was a lobbyist in Annapolis about the number of phone calls that it takes for a legislator to really pay attention to an issue. One legislator said about 15 to 20 phone calls really turns the tide on how they feel about an issue, because that's showing them that their constituents cared enough to call. Just some tips for when you're calling your legislator: expect to speak with a staff member, not your representative, and be prepared to provide your name and your residence so they can make sure they're talking to a constituent. Be concise and make your points clearly. Always be polite in both tone and language, and explain why you're calling and what action you would like your legislator to take. And when possible, discuss the issue from a personal perspective. So why are you fighting for that issue? Is it to protect your home? Is it for public health? You should lead with your personal reason. Thank the staff member for taking the time to talk with you. And remember, even if you didn't speak with a staff member, it will be conveyed to your representative. And if you reached a voicemail, please leave a message. They do check their message and keep track of constituent concerns. The most powerful tool that we have as advocates is actually to meet face to face with our local elected officials. And when I think about lobbying, I think about it in three different ways. So one is to activate the legislators that are already on our side about our issue. So we want more than for that legislator just to vote for our issue. We also want them to be talking to their colleagues, to be showing up to news conferences, and to using their leadership to amplify our causes. And so if you have someone that is supportive of your issue, you should really use that meeting time to talk about what are the other ways that they can amplify, and to find out information from them. Who are their colleagues that they need to talk to that might be on the fence? The second reason why you would have a lobby meeting is just to persuade and educate somebody that's sitting on the fence of your issue, providing them with more information and education, and persuading them over to your side. And if you have someone, and this often happens a lot of folks are saying, should I go to my more conservative member and talk about these issues? Or my legislator doesn't care about environmental issues. You should still talk to those legislators for an important reason, and that's to neutralize them. So for instance, during the fracking campaign, a lot of the Western Maryland legislators were staunchly opposed to a ban on fracking. But one of the things that helped to neutralize them, and from going to their other colleagues and also getting them on board, was just the sheer number of folks that came out and advocated with them face to face. I remember in the last days of that session, we had about 300 Western Maryland residents came out. And one of the things that Senator Edwards from Garrett County said after seeing about 86 folks that were coming from his district all lined up to meet with him is, I'm not going to support the ban, but I'm not going to be walking the halls asking others, drawing more support. So those are really the three reasons why you should be lobbying and pushing your officials. It's also the best way and the most personal touch that you can give, and shows your legislator how much and how passionate you are about an issue. So tips for meeting with your legislator is like, one, identify your main message. If you're going with a group, determine roles for participants. You might want to have your faith leader come with you, or a local business person. Prepare and practice for the meeting. Get together, go over your talking points with your group. And this is one that I think folks always forget, and I don't know why, but make sure you introduce yourself and where you're from. I think folks sometimes get a little nervous right before lobby meetings, and that can often be missed. And most importantly, make a strong ask of your legislator. Ask them point blank in a yes or no question, like, will you support X or will you oppose X? So it's a yes or no question, and they can't weasel out of it. And then another really important thing is to follow up. So if they said, we can't make a decision right now, or I need to do more research, is often an answer that you'll get. One of the things you can say is, what materials do you need to help you make a decision? Can I follow up with you in a week or two to see if you've come to a decision yet? And I think this is the most important role of lobbying is you don't need to be an expert. The most powerful tool that you have is your own personal reason that you're supporting an issue. I remember going to a Maryland Department of Environment meeting, and Cheryl Arney was there, and she held up a picture of her granddaughter and talked about why she was fighting for climate issues. And to this day, that's been one of the most powerful reminders that the tools that we have are really our own personal stories and our lived experience. And I'm usually the one that has all the facts and figures, and those are usually forgotten about pretty easily by legislators. But what sticks with them is the stories and the people. So remember to lead with your personal story and why you're supporting an issue. We are in the midst of a global pandemic still. And so one of the things that we've had to consider are what are COVID-19 safe actions? We all know that Annapolis is going to look very, very different this year. There might not be open access to the buildings, there'll be fewer hearings. And so one of the other ways that we can amplify our message is through COVID-19 safe activities. So street murals, visibility actions, amplifying your cause on social media, doing banner drops and light projections are ways that you can still draw attention to your issue in a way that's mediagenic, draws attention, and still keeps you safe in these times. And then next, I just wanted to give a brief overview about some of the climate legislation that's coming up in Maryland. First, we have the Climate Solutions Act. I believe it's going to get a different name this year, but it's a bill that's being supported by Senator Penske this year that would get Maryland on track to have a 60% reduction of greenhouse gases by the year 2030 and get Maryland to net zero emissions by 2045 or 2040. And we didn't just want to set a goal, we actually wanted to make sure there were concrete steps to start us on our way. And so there is a lot of provisions in that bill. For instance, converting our state and state vehicle and bus fleets over to electric, higher energy efficiency and building standards, and a plethora of other things, including really trying to right the wrongs that have happened in Maryland with environmental justice issues and setting up an environmental justice working group and making sure that proceeds are going to underserved and overburdened communities, as well as making sure that we're communicating with our labor brothers and sisters by setting up a labor working group so that we have a comprehensive climate policy that not only works for our climate, but also works for workers. Another bill that'll be coming up in this session is the Public Service Commission climate test. And the Public Service Commission is the entity that approves permits for solar, for power plants, for any infrastructure needs. And we had a case in Baltimore where the CP Crane plant was being converted to natural gas. And when advocates wrote to them and said, you shouldn't convert this plant to natural gas, CP Crane actually wrote the PSC and said, you actually don't have to consider climate in making this decision. And the Public Service Commission said, you're absolutely right. We don't have to consider climate. And so advocates and champions took up that cause and now are reintroducing legislation to ensure that the Public Service Commission looks at Maryland's climate goals, looks at cumulative impacts, and looks at the environmental impacts and how we're making decisions on siting power plants and other infrastructure. The bill passed last year in the Senate, but failed to advance in the House before session adjourned. Another bill that we're looking at is the Maryland Transit Safety and Investment Act. Unfortunately, in Maryland, transit is woefully underfunded, especially in the greater Baltimore region and Baltimore City itself. And so one of the things that we advocates are looking at doing is to make sure that we're reallocating funds from the Transportation Trust Fund to fill the backlog of repairs, maintenance, and capital projects that need to be done in order to make sure that our transit operates safely. And then to build off of that, we're also working on a regional initiative called the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And right now that's under discussion with Maryland and 11 other states that are looking at, should we have a regional carbon pricing program on transportation. So right now, the proposal that folks are pushing for is to have a really strong, ambitious goal and cap on emissions, as well as to make sure that we're directing funds towards underserved and overburdened communities in our area, and that we're having an equitable distribution of funds, which leads us to the Transportation Carbon Reduction Fund. And that's a bill that's linked with the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And what that bill would do is basically put a lockbox around any funds that come from that regional program. And it also sets up an advisory board of community stakeholders to define the criteria for underserved and overburdened communities, and then direct proceeds for that or come up with recommendations. The last thing is the coal phase out bill will again be reintroduced this year. I'm sure everyone knows that Maryland faced the closure of 2 of its 6 coal plants with the Dickerson and Chalk Point closures. And what this bill would do is, one, set a date to phase out coal by 2030, but also develop a worker transition fund so that we're safeguarding those communities from economic collapse and not just pulling out, and also providing tools for worker retraining, things like that. So I'm gonna stop there because I feel like I've been talking at you a lot, and take some time for questions if folks have any about different advocacy tactics or about any of the different legislation.
Right, you can feel free to type a question into the chat, or since there are not too many people jumping in all at once, you can try even to do it orally if you want to unmute yourself.
Looks like Laura Heller has a
Great.
question.
Go ahead.
Laura, are you unmuted?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So I have a question, and our Delaware, Maryland was involved in the advocacy for the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And so, but when you mention like 2045 for 100% carbon neutral, is that like, are we reevaluating that date? Because in light of, current things, it seems like that's too far out. It seems like we really need to be pushing for something that is much, much sooner than that. So that, when I heard that date, it just kind of, struck a chord. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
So for the Climate Solutions Act, it's the 60% reduction by 2030, which is in line with what the IPCC is recommending. MDE said that we would be able to reach like a 50% goal and are aligned with that. We want to push it even harder to a 60% reduction as well. Are you talking about the Clean Energy Jobs Act and the 50% goal?
Well, that, but plus what you said about 100% by like 2045, which just seems like it's, way too far out there, that we need to be much more aggressive in our goals. So just wanted to, find out, if something like that is going to be revisited, or, how we're viewing that.
So I don't think we'll be working on a renewable portfolio standard in this term to increase that goal. That was one of the commitments that came out of the last Clean Energy Jobs Act. I do think we can push harder for stronger goals I think the Climate Solutions Act is set with those goals with like the 60% reduction by 2030. But one of the provisions that's in it right now is like a look back and a sunset date. And what that's done in the past is allowed us to look and see, should we be advancing our goals and be accelerating? So there are checkpoints in that legislation if we do need to move forward faster. But that's our baseline right now.
Thank you. How does that compare with other states that are taking on this type of legislation? I mean, I'm sure there's many that aren't even considering it, but, you know, are there similar, you know, target dates, or are they more aggressive or less aggressive? Just curious.
I would say like Maryland's in the top tier with their goal setting. New York and California have 100% goals. And I think we also put that we want to get to net zero emissions, and we want to get to 100% clean energy. So I think Maryland actually does rank high. We often joke that we're never the first state to do anything, but we're always like the second, third, or the fourth. So I do think we're a trendsetter and a leader on climate in Maryland.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Ethan, you had a question.
Yeah, first, thank you so much for coming on. This was super interesting, and just learning about the 2021 legislative plan is really exciting. There's a lot of cool stuff happening, and I'm super appreciative of your work for pushing that forward. So my question is, I was just hoping you could break down the Transportation and Climate Initiative and the Transportation Carbon Reduction Fund a little bit more, and specifically how they tie in together and work to enfranchise underserved and overburdened communities.
So the Transportation and Climate Initiative is really similar to another program we have called the Regional Greenhouse and Gas Initiative. And that's a multi-state compact where we're trying to do the same thing for transportation, which is basically set a strong cap on transportation emissions. And then, as per usual with other cap and trade programs, then states would be allowed to sell those allowances and auction those off, and that would generate funds. So right now it's the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, and they're currently working on the details of the deal. So what advocates have been pushing for is a strong 30% reduction cap, as well as either a set amount of funds that go to underserved and overburdened communities. And also, like, the other recommendation is to make sure that they have advisory boards that include community stakeholders so that they can direct how the funds are being used. We don't think, so right now the timeline is that these states will be forming a memorandum of understanding. We expect that to come out in December. We hope that Hogan will sign on to the MOU so that Maryland can enter the program. But what we also wanted to do, because Hogan has had a legacy of expanding highways or transportation cuts and scrapping of projects that disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities, especially in Baltimore City. And so what we wanted to do with the legislature was to work out, to put up some guardrails around the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And so that's where the Transportation Carbon Reduction Fund legislation comes in. It was introduced last year by Delegate Corman didn't have a companion in the Senate. This year, we really want to move it forward. And what that would do is it would set up a lockbox for those funds. So they could only be used towards programs that would reduce emissions in transportation. And then the second thing we wanted to do is define some perimeters for those funds that we would receive from that program. So whatever is outlined in the MOU, as well as like targeted investments in transit and pedestrian pathways and other things that will reduce emissions and move Maryland forward on transportation.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Claire, you had a question about how Brooke would suggest that we encourage people of faith to get involved in advocating for legislation. Do you want to expand a little bit on that question so that Brooke can have a better sense of how to answer?
Or I recognize that there's a lot of people of faith on this call that are interested in advocacy, but we all are in parishes where there's lots of other people of faith. And I know when I personally share about, oh, I'm advocating for this and this, I get a lot of like, oh, that's kind of like not what I do. And I guess I'm looking for some, like, how would Brooke Harper overcome that objection?
So I actually taught a Lent class, a Lenten series. And I think it's really meeting folks where they're at, to be honest with you, and talking. And that's why I say, talk to folks. Maybe their first event is a teach-in with the Climate in the Pulpits program. One of the reasons why we did that is because it's hard to draw people at. So if we're meeting them in their place of worship, if they're hearing their faith leaders talk about it, if they're hearing from other activists, and start out with a petition. I always call it, you'll hear a term called like ladders of engagement. So you probably did not start out as an activist, like running out in the streets and lobbying. It took you a while to get there. So just keep that in mind, that you also have to meet people where they're at and provide specific on-ramps for them. So can you host a guest speaker? Can you do a coffee hour talk? And that's what I would talk and really find out, like, what are their personal motivations, like why they should care about it. How does it impact them? Another way that I've found to be really successful is the denominational lobby days. So when folks know about them, people actually attend. So letting folks know about those opportunities. I'm always kind of upset because the Episcopals always outnumber the Methodists during this. But spread the word about opportunities like that, where they can go in a faith community and learn how to advocate. But I would meet people with where they're at. I can't tell you how many movie nights I've done in congregations, and that's another really simple way to get people engaged, and then just have a follow-up conversation with them afterwards. And I'm sure people feel the same way that I do, that our activism and our advocacy is actually how we live out our faith. And I think talking about that and saying, these are the values that we hold within our faith traditions, advocacy is the way that we're living out those values in our life.
Thank you so much. Great advice.
I think it was a great question, because there is sometimes resistance, Claire, you're right. And I think it was great advice. And just to piggyback, the more we act as advocates as an expression of our faith, and we show that to others, to other people of faith and to other congregations, the more it will become normalized that, oh yes, one of the best ways to express our faith is through these actions. So I think we have to do it, and we have to do it publicly, and we have to do it in a way that's visible. And I think, Brooke, you're absolutely right. The lobby days are fabulous, because not only do they bring people to Annapolis and get some advocacy done, but what they do is they express boldly and publicly that this is the way faith is lived out, right, through this advocacy. So it normalizes it. And it does, as I say, when I hear Brooke, talking about this, it's like, it's not why should I do that, but why am I not doing that? That's the way faith people behave. So making it normal is something that we can all do simply by speaking out loud that this is what we do and this is the way faith is expressed. So thank you, Claire, for that great question. Melanie, you had, yes, a very powerful question. So why don't you want to speak out loud the question? Otherwise I would read it, but can you unmute yourself and speak your question? You there? Let me start reading it then. You can interrupt me if you're there. So Melanie says, and Brooke, you might be able to see this in the chat.
I think she's still on mute.
I'm sorry, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, so I just got off of a Zoom call from about our policy group, and we've formed a subcommittee on environmental justice, and the Delaware pipeline is a concern because although, well, because of the fracking, and it poses all kinds of environmental concerns, but also economic concerns as well. I mean, that pipeline will be obsolete in 5 years, and yet the people of Maryland will be on the hook for the next 20 years to pay for it. So the question, and I was on a call with a bunch of attorneys, and God, talk about feeling like the elephant in the room. I said, so what about green jobs? Because everybody's saying this is going to bring so many jobs and to the people of Somerset, which is a depressed area. And I said, what about green jobs? And it was just dead silence. And they said, okay, getting back to what we were talking about. So, how do you take the political argument for this, that it's, yes, in the short term going to create jobs, but economically you're going to be losing money in the long term, plus your facility is going to become obsolete, plus we're going to be back to the same thing of taking the environment back X number of years, and we're still not promoting, we're still burning fossil fuels, we're not doing anything that's green. And I'm just wondering, how do you get the politicians or the stakeholders to set aside their political agenda long enough to just look at data on what this would entail?
Good question. I think, especially for the Eastern Shore pipelines, there's very limited venues that you can fight those pipelines at. That was one of my experience with like the Potomac pipeline, was one that there was very limited venues to stop it once we found out about it. So right now, the Eastern Shore pipeline, your main vehicles to win are through the Board of Public Works or overturning one of those permits, which is very, very, very difficult to do. The best way to stop a pipeline is to not have one started and to get in at the very beginning, which is very, very hard. I don't think people realize how difficult that is. I remember our brothers and sisters in West Virginia, like literally canvass their communities and like we're notifying people along the route. So that's the first difficulty. And I think there needs to be some guardrails set up to stop this from happening. There needs to be greater community notification. I should not be notifying my city council member that there's a pipeline that's going to impact our river. And that's what happened. And so I really thought that campaign was won by engaging our local elected officials. I think in the case of the Eastern Shore pipeline, you need to talk about green jobs, but you also need to talk about equity. Why is a historically Black college and university, why is there alternative energy frack gas? And talk about the implications that has on their community. And I think this ties into like the Resco contract, but we really need to talk to I think we need to stop talking about environmental justice as kind of like an afterthought and really make our legislators listen, especially some of our older leaders, and making sure they understand the impacts on Black and Brown communities and speak up for them instead of big business. And I think there's plenty of facts around how fossil fuel jobs are phasing out, and how they're being taken over by green jobs. So one of the most compelling arguments is this is not going to bring Maryland jobs. This is not going to bring Maryland jobs. This is going to bring out-of-state workers to put it in the pipelines, that it's not really going to bring jobs, and it's not going to bring economic prosperity. And I think we can talk about what are the things that could bring green jobs into that area. But I think like I think those conversations need to start before we're in a crisis situation. Mm-hmm. And they need to start like yesterday. But I think I would talk about the economic opportunity. Maryland does have a large renewable energy industry. We have over 70,000 people employed in energy efficiency. We've got thousands of solar workers. Part of the wide support for offshore wind was that it was going to bring manufacturing back into Baltimore. So I think we need to stop with like the false analogy that we can't have good green jobs, and talk about we really need to invest in those first before looking at these other alternatives. And unfortunately, in that case, that contract was only limited to natural gas companies. So they didn't even look at other alternative forms of energy to power that school and the correctional facility.
Mhm.
Brooke, is 350.org getting engaged in that particular issue, that particular pipeline at one? And two, are those the kinds of things that you do at 350.org, get engaged in these local fights?
No, we have a local organizer, Dominique, for Maryland. The organizations that are closest to the Eastern Shore Pipeline right now, I would say, are CCAN and Sierra Club that have really been on the ground, and they've been mobilizing folks on the Eastern Shore, as well as Delegate Charcoutian.
All right, with those, so Melody, there's sort of a group of people and individuals whom you can connect with to begin to fight with that. That is really great.
Sorry,
and-
could you repeat that last part one more time? I was just taking a call from work. I'm sorry, keep going. The last group.
Saying Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Sierra Club,
Delegate Charcoutian.
and as well as an Environmental Integrity Project has been active on it too, and Delegate Laura Charcoutian. And we really need folks, they've been organizing on the Eastern Shore. I think it needs more of a robust grassroots movement and really more pressure on our local elected officials.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Somewhat related, and you actually mentioned Resco. Peggy Myers says, Resco contract was renewed for 10 years. Baltimore County just renewed its contract with Resco, and she asks, is there anything we can do?
I think we've had a lot of efforts to remove incineration out of our clean energy standard. I know there's been a steady campaign in Baltimore City for that. I think you have new leadership in Baltimore City, so maybe appeal to them. I think, but also finding alternatives. I think that's one of those things where like, how do we stop the moving train? And I think it's unfortunately like one of those answers of like, don't get it on the tracks in the first place. But I think getting involved in composting and alternative waste forms, so we're not sending so much, and showing how Baltimore City and other jurisdictions can be zero waste communities is how we're going to win that fight. The incinerator lobby is very strong. There's also members of like the legislative Black Caucus that were split over that issue. So I think it's talking to our leadership. It's making sure that they're standing on the right side of the issue, and just continuing to fight. I know it's a long, hard battle with that incinerator, but continuing to raise your voices and talking about the health implications.
Great, thank you.
As a follow-up, could I just ask, with the corporations that are making all the plastic and selling all their products in plastic, is 350.org working on having them responsible for some of these things?
350 is more so working, like we work more on the federal level, like the national landscape. So right now we're really, the pandemic threw us for a loop. So we've really been working on a just recovery the last few months and making sure that bailout funds weren't given to fossil fuel companies has been one of our main angles. And that's been a really big focus of our work. And it also is like building a multiracial intersectional movement for climate change and to get 100% off fossil fuels as we go based on the elections. We'll either be heading to make sure that we're passing legislation like Thrive or just recovery legislation to recover from the pandemic in the new year, as well as pushing, hopefully, a new president to sign some executive actions against fossil fuels and reverse the orders, all the damage that Trump has done in all of those orders. So that'll probably be our focus when the new administration comes in.
Thank you.
A question from Bernadette. Pipelines, she says, are so geographically spread out, crossing state lines. What but would the rule about notification have to be a federal law? Because you had mentioned, it's making a regulation that you would have to be notified. That would be a federal law. Is that something that's in the works?
So they do not have that. I know there was like a couple of PSC, Public Service Commission bills a few years ago about community notification. Right now, what'll happen is the gas company will have an open house and try to engage the community. But by then, the plans have been set. It's too late. And that's been really, that's the greatest conflict that you have when you're fighting pipelines is when they're not handing over their map. So how are you getting community notification? So like with the Potomac pipeline, it was literally two women with a map trying to canvass all of the different, with the pipeline like route map that they had gotten from the open house, literally canvassing all of the houses and surrounding communities nearby, which is why the notification is so hard. FERC, which is like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that oversees interstate pipelines, has a whole community engagement that includes things like open houses. But by then, it's normally too late. And they've already mapped it out and already have the project kind of greenlit. And there's a couple of places to intervene. So like one is with FERC, you can do a comment and push for an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment, which is a bit stronger. But really there's limited venues, which is why we looked at things like the Public Service Commission climate test. So we're not playing whack-a-mole with all of these fights because it's really hard.
Well, if I can just expand on that, Bernadette, there is something called the Maryland Environmental Policy Act from 1973, which says that all state agencies and entities have to create rules and regulations that would make environmental protection among the highest priorities of the state of Maryland. Maryland Environmental Policy Act says that each person has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment, and all the agencies and entities of the state have to create methods and procedures, those are its words, methods and procedures to implement that right. That really hasn't happened, but one of the things that we're trying to do here at the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights, and hopefully with others, is force the agencies and the state entities like PSC to actually promulgate those methods and procedures that would implement that right that we've had since 1973, which hasn't really been enforced. And part of those rules and regulations would be appropriate public information. And so it's not here yet, Bernadette, but one of the things that we want to be working on is creating that right that we all have to timely and helpful information. So, you can hear Brooke's frustration. We hear your frustration. And I think that if some people are interested in figuring out what their role of advocacy is, even just focusing on getting the rightful information out in timely and efficient and accessible manners to the public would be a great advocacy role to undertake. So thanks for that question, Dick. Dick Williams says, speaking of Governor Hogan signing on to an MOU, Brooke, can you generalize about how Maryland DOE Secretary, that's Maryland, I think it's MDE Secretary.
Sorry, Department of the Environment.
Yeah, Secretary Grumbles pushes Hogan on certain issues and pulls him back on others. One particular where I'm not certain about Grumbles pushing or just talking is toxic basement backups due to flooding in many neighborhoods around Baltimore City. So Brooke, do you want to comment on that?
I can't speak to the issue in Baltimore City or Grumbles like disposition of whether he pushes or pulls back Hogan. I think it's always good to start conversations with MDE and their staff while you're also pushing Hogan directly. So we had really, like during the Potomac Pipeline campaign and during the fracking campaign, we engaged with the MDE heavily and engaged with his staff and engaged with Grumbles. And so I think that's one where you'll probably be able to push him if you have an open door and are able to like speak with him or present legislation But I think you also need to be like pushing Governor Hogan as well at the same time. And I think Governor Hogan is one that is a very strategic politician. And I think he really listens to the people when he knows it's going to be detrimental to his popularity. I mean, he came out and said, I'm going to ban fracking. He saw the writing or the votes on the wall, but then he's also the same governor that just invested $100 million in natural gas and started the Potomac pipeline like 3 weeks later after he banned fracking. So I think it's continual public pressure, not only on public pressure on Governor Hogan and engagement with the Maryland Department of Environment. So I think if you're engaging with MDE officials, that's going to help your case. You can work and craft things together versus them coming out opposed. And then continuously, I think with Governor Hogan, he does respond to public pressure. I think the fracking ban is proof of that. His denial of like the Potomac pipeline is proof of that. Like, and he doesn't want the carpet pulled out from under him. And wants to appear as the green governor. So I think as much as you can take advantage of it, take advantage of it. But it does come with like heavy public pressure. And that's the way you can move them, as well as engaging with MDE.
That's a great answer, Brooke. Thank you very much. My question sort of took you into Baltimore City, and after I hit send, I realized that you don't live anywhere near Baltimore City yourself.
No, I live in Hagerstown, Maryland. So.
Brooke goes all over the place, though.
No, mostly staying here since fit.
COVID is good for letting us stay home, at least, even though we work broadly. Bernadette asks again, how do we coordinate the training needed for green jobs and the creation of them? Some states are really proactive about getting programs into their community colleges. Bernadette, by the way, is a professor, you should know. Does Maryland have a mechanism for this?
We do. So part of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and there's been several iterations of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but back in 2017, one of the things that we did was we had this really ambitious workforce development program, and that all got stripped out of the bill. But Governor Hogan liked that language in the bill. And so he took that program and part of the EARN funding, which is like an employment workforce development fund, actually went to community colleges to build out green jobs. So my community college, Hagerstown Community College, is one of the recipients of one of those awards. So we now have like solar training programs. We also incorporated that in the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Those funds will be released in 2021, but there was a set fund that set aside from, it's called the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. So we use some of that funding in order to like not only put things in community colleges, but also to upgrade vocational and technical schools so that folks that weren't on a college bound track could also be on the track to join into a renewable energy career. So those are two things. I think we need to fund them more. I don't think we'll probably be asking for a lot of funding for anything this year because I think Maryland is really notorious for like paying tight attention to fiscal notes. But we do have some of those programs in place and funding allocated for that. One really great program I've heard about was the NAACP partnered with the Maryland, Virginia, DC Solar Energy Industry Association to kind of create a place where folks could learn about solar jobs. So I think partnerships like that, community partnerships with industry, holding webinars, holding seminars, and things like that is a really great way. I think one of the best programs that I've seen is Civic Works with like clean energy jobs and how they're just amazing. They're just amazing and have a lot of programs for like returning citizens, car rides to the job training. Power 52 is another group, but I do think, getting them in technical and community college is definitely some place where we should look at, can Maryland invest more in those? So we do have a mechanism for this. I think it'd be great if we had even more funding for those types of initiatives.
Wonderful. Brenda, thank you for the question, and Brooke for the answer. So I have just to veer in a slightly different direction. Brooke, you had mentioned as one of the advocacy initiatives that one could take is visibility actions, certainly during COVID in particular. Can you give us some examples of visibility actions?
So just like a banner visibility action. So we've seen a lot of visibility lately. So yard signs, things like that, street murals. So many, I've seen like the Black Lives Matter street murals that have gone up. You can do light projections. I can make the pictures in my presentation a little bit bigger so you can see but this is one of the light projections we did. So you can do something like that. You can do banner drops, but we can't do, people are doing big rallies. I doubt that's going to be the case a lot of the time. And if people want to do like safe actions, you could hang a big banner over a building. You could do light projections like we just saw, or street murals. So I think those are like the types of visibility actions that like I was speaking to, and make them mediagenic, like the light projections. Some of the things and actions that we've done were just photo ops, really. So I remember on the Delaware Pipeline, we had like a 40-foot inflatable pipeline for a press conference. It's really hard to get folks press to come out to Hagerstown. Into Hancock. So every time we did something, it had to be big. But think creatively, use your arts. It doesn't just have to be visibility. You can use song, other things like that, but be creative with your actions.
And because we are talking to a faith community, and many congregations have, boards that are outside their buildings with signage possibilities. I mean, to think creatively about what one can do with that, with words, with art, and banners. You're absolutely right. So we should think of our real estate as a canvas to promote something, and we don't even, so it could be low cost and absolutely available there. Any other? I think we went through all the questions that were in the chat. Any other folks want to offer additional comments or talk about maybe an organization that you have in your congregation, in your denomination, that we should all know about, so that we can have additional resources that we can connect to? And start putting them in the chat, and then I can look at that. In the meantime, I do want to mention one other legislative initiative that is coming up beyond the 6 that Brooke mentioned. And maybe as a follow-up, we can also give you a link to other places where you can find additional legislative initiatives that might be of interest to you. But one that the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights is championing is the Environmental Human Rights Constitutional Amendment. And that is an amendment that actually takes the words of the 1973 Maryland Environmental Policy Act and wants to put them in the Constitution. So those words again are, each person has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment. And though it was put into language by the General Assembly in 1973, it was encased in an act that really didn't give that language any teeth. So we want to take that language, put it in the Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, which we call the Declaration of Rights, so that each and every one of us has, as part of our civil rights package, on par with all the other civil rights that we have, the right to a healthful environment. And then we can fight to protect that environment. We have a right to fight for a healthy environment, and we have legal standing to fight for a healthy environment. And we can fight against environmental injustices. We can promote healthy developments. And Bernadette, the ways that would give us green jobs, so that would be just, and fight the pipeline on the Eastern Shore, fight the pipeline that's going to go through, trying to go through Charles County. It would provide legal underpinning for all the environmental rules and laws that we have now. Right now, all of them are in jeopardy. They can always be overturned, underfunded, waved away. But if we had a right, they couldn't be. So that's another initiative that you all might be interested in. And we, of course, would certainly welcome any participation there. And we had this question earlier and we have it again. So I think we need to explain it once again. What is a banner drop?
I'm just going to look for a really great example for you.
All right, and while Brooke is doing that, I want to go back to another point that Brooke made. 2 points. It is astonishing how few phone calls it takes to persuade legislators that this is a big issue. I've heard those same numbers that Brooke said, 15 or 20 phone calls. That's just astonishing. You can get 15 or 20 members of your congregations, to make a phone call, and that can really persuade somebody. And again, persuasion means several things. I just loved Brooke's 3 reasons for why to lobby: activate, persuade, and neutralize. Either you just want to, get somebody who you think is on your side, but make sure that they know you're absolutely behind them, and just, make sure that they stay fired up and a proponent of what you want them to be a proponent of. Or you want to persuade them if you think you can convince them and they're not yet quite convinced. But as importantly, neutralize, right? That's just fabulous story, Brooke, that you told us about how you took a potential opponent and just quieted them. And if you quiet the opponents, that's also very powerful. So make those phone calls so you can do one of those 3 things as lobbyists, personal, citizen lobbyists. But the other thing is, don't be cowed. You don't have to have all the answers. If a staff person or a legislator asks you a detailed question that you don't know, just say that, I don't know, but that there are people out there like Brooke who do know, and you'll be able to go to them and say, I'll get you that information. You don't have to know the details, but you have to be there to be passionate and say, but I know this is the right thing to do, and this is why. So
Nina, this is Vaughn. I found a good example of a banner.
Please go right ahead. Those are banner drops. But I don't want to dissuade people. You don't have to it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I mean, use your sheet and put it outside your house, but yeah, those are the things. Just let big letters in public places that people can read. I don't know, Brooke, did you want to share a banner drop too, or you're good?
Here one too. Here's another one. It was done over a building.
That's fabulous. All right, let me see what else we got here. Banner job somebody else put in. Phil, thank you for that link. Lenore Myers. What realistic impact do you expect on legislation this year due to the state financial problems caused by COVID?
I think this is going to be a legislative year that is unlike any other year. And so I think, one, we need to be vigilant about making sure that we have public access to our legislature, and that remains open through like virtual hearings and things like that, so that the people still have an opportunity to be heard. So I think it'll be a unique year for advocacy. I think Maryland has always, at least in my experience with the legislature, has always paid very close attention to any fiscal impact caused by a bill. I think we have a governor that won on anti-tax sentiment. And so I think that will have an impact on how far we're able to push this year. Just realistically, with my sad hat on, everything that I've been looking at, I'm like, dear God, what's the fiscal note on this? Or how do you make it revenue neutral? And I really think for folks that are putting forward legislation that they want to pass this year, they need to take a hard look at the fiscal note, that being said, like, I think that'll be one of the things that you'll need in order to get a bill past the finish line is a low fiscal note, or that it has a high economic impact. We're also hearing that they're not going to take up as many bills. You've seen President Ferguson trying to narrow the number of bills that can be introduced, and they'll be so in fewer sessions. So I think that's why you have like a mad dash. Everybody's pre-filing their bills right now, or has this week. And I think I think the financial crisis of the state is going to have a big impact. I think that's when you look at what issues the Maryland Senate wants to take up, it's really about how are we going to fix unemployment? How are we going to fix our budget? And I think we need to talk to them about how multiple crises are happening right now. We've got the crisis of COVID, we've got the climate crisis. And so how I think it's important for all of you to put your faith in action and really advocate for the issues that you want to see. Because one, it's going to be hard to just get airspace for a lot of issues that aren't dealing with the immediate needs in responding to the pandemic. And two, it's going to be hard to put big cost or big ticket items this year.
Great. Any other last comments? Well, I want to thank you, Brooke, as always, for your wisdom and your inspiration. I love listening to you talk, and it's good to know that you're out there. It's good to know that you're a resource for us, and we might maybe share your email with everybody, so in case they want to be in touch with you with questions that we could have them do, that would be quite wonderful. And I just want to sort of bridge tonight with next week. Next week will be our last week as a whole group together. And one of the things that we're going to be doing next week will be breaking out again into our facilitated discussions and really drilling down and focusing on what were those things that you heard over the past 3 weeks, and including and especially tonight, that most inspired you. What are the particular issues that you think you would like to work on? What were the particular responses and activities that you think you would like to work on? Again, we are here to go from learning to action. And what we want to do after next week is for all of us to leave with a beginning of a plan, so that right after next Thursday, you will know the very next steps that you're supposed to take, that you have chosen to take, so that you can move into action. And those might be joining other organizations for advocacy. It might be learning more about a particular issue. It might be learning more about how to connect with your legislators. It might be bringing environmental justice training to your community, to your congregation, to your denomination. Could be any of those things and others, but we definitely want you to leave with a plan of action, and we will be working with you to follow up on that plan of action even after next week. So take what you're learning tonight and the other few weeks and sort of cogitate over them. We will also be sending you this coming week a couple of, it's sort of like a gift, several videos and recordings of people who have been engaged in these few weeks with us, and them talking about themselves as frontline and fence line communities dealing with environmental justice issues. So you can really see the faces and voices of your neighbors and understand the issues that they're dealing with. So to conclude, I want to, first of all, thank the folks on Facebook who might be watching us there, and thank everyone here again for coming. I also want to thank the team that continues to work so hard over these weeks to put the program together. My comrades at heart, as I call them, Claire Miller, Jenny Neslage, Ken Phelps, Bernadette Roche, Kathy Shahinian, and Dick Williams. They are indefatigable group of people and just a delightful group of people to work with. So I thank you all. Whoop, we got 4 chats. Let me just double check on them. Or maybe not, I have some chats for me. Okay, so I will be in touch with all of you. Brooke, did you want to say any last comment as we go?
Just thank you all so much. You're all great. Keep doing what you're doing. We got a long, hard fight ahead of us, and we need people of faith in action more than ever now, not only to be like a grounding source for all of us, but to be a force that also moves mountains that we have before and will continue to do. So thanks so much.
Brooke, you're wonderful. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. And as we say, you came in peace, we spoke in peace. May you leave in peace. Take care. Bye-bye.